burn and brew with Coven true, and glorious shall be thine.
Hey friends, it's Jasmine. I hope that you all are doing well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I am a practicing witch and I talk about that here on the internet. So if you're into all things witchery, maybe check out some of the other videos here on my channel. All of my social media links are also down below if you would like to follow me elsewhere. If you are a returning subscriber, it's really good to see your face. Thank you so much for coming back and supporting me and this channel. Your support really means the world to me. In today's video, we are going to be covering the hashtag topic, hashtag Tradtober, and this is going to be week 3, where we are talking about the topic of beloved dead. So the first question is, how do you define the term beloved dead? What does this mean, if anything at all, to you and your practice? You know, do you have another name that you refer to these spirits as? For myself, when I'm referring to the beloved dead, I am referring specifically to the ancestors that I am connected with by blood, primarily. This would mean my literal ancestors, my literal ancestry, you know, like my mother's mother's mother and my father's father's father and so forth, going back, which this gets kind of messy if you actually begin to kind of trace your family lineage. I might have like a chart or something over here, but basically every generation you go back, this sort of triangle gets bigger and wider with different relatives and family members, and it can get really confusing sometimes. In general, that is kind of the concept that comes to my mind when I think of beloved dead. But I also think that this can kind of expand wider than just literal blood, because I think there's also something to be said about familial-like relationships. As someone who has kind of grown up with an adopted dad and didn't meet my biological father's side of the family and really get closer to them until later, there is something to be said about the relationship that I have with my adopted family. And so while other people might limit their sort of beloved dead just to their literal bloodline, I also see family by law or family by close familial relations. Like if you ever had any of those friends growing up that kind of became part of your family, or if you were that friend who kind of became part of someone else's family, I think that we could see them also as beloved dead. When I think of the term beloved, I think of a sense of endearing and familiarity that comes with a close family-like bond. That would be how I would define it. The next question is, what ancestral cultural folk magic practices call to you from your family's origin, if at all? And I think that this question can even be more open-ended than that. Again, if we're going back and if we're looking at our family trees and if we're studying the people who have walked before us, who have lived on this land before us, and if we attempt to trace this back as much as we can, what folklore is there? What folk magic is there? What witchery lies within those sort of stories? I think that's really important for us to narrow in on, especially as trad witches, but also like in general during this time of year when the veil is the thinnest. Now, I'm going to be speaking for myself here, but as many of us Americans, we come from a very multicultural, multiracial even background sometimes. And I think that there's this really horrific and ugly truth when it comes to being American about our colonialist history that cannot be avoided. And I think that that's part of the reason sometimes why some people don't want to dig into their background and why some people don't want to dig into their ancestry is because they're worried about what sort of skeletons they might dig up. There's also people that are really at odds to find this information because it has been stolen from them and taken from them and buried away from them. I think there's a sense of accountability and ownership that we as modern practitioners, looking at our past and looking at our bloodline, can really seek to acknowledge. That's the first thing, is just acknowledging the atrocities. It's one thing to look in the past and say, oh, you know, these groups of people did horrible things and we all know that and that was bad. And it's another thing to go back and look and see that it was your 5th great grandfather who actually did that. Do you know what I mean? I think that this question deserves a little bit of nuance, because when it comes to ancestral folk practices, what I'm referring to is your red soul, your genetic DNA-like imprint that connects you to your beloved dead. We all have magic in every form and shape of culture and people. It's been here as long as we have. So there is magic everywhere. There is folklore everywhere. I think it's important to remember also, though, and I'm really speaking mostly to the Americans here, or North Americans, but there is a difference also being in the diaspora. So being Irish American or being Italian American is also wildly different than being Irish or being Italian. And I think that recognizing that is okay, but I think it should be recognized, and we shouldn't necessarily erase sort of mother country voices when it comes to folklore, while also acknowledging that these things can change over time as these stories have been passed on. And I think it's natural for there to be some sort of variance in the diaspora of different communities. But I just think it's important to acknowledge that and be aware of that. So in my own background, I'm deeply inspired on my mother's side by a lot of the mysteries and lore of the Levant. And this year, I have been really deeply diving into my paternal side, my biological father's side, which appears to me to have a lot of Irish and French and German influence. And I'm still piecing a lot of that together myself. Like I've mentioned, I grew up with an adopted dad. I didn't really know that side of the family very well. I wasn't very close with my biological father. And I've really only met my extended family on that side after my biological father passed, and I was invited to go to his funeral, and I ended up actually meeting some of these people. And it's so interesting to me, because how do you almost mourn a stranger? And how do I feel a sense of familiarity with people that I've never known? Right? Who are some of the beloved dead that you venerate, and how? So I think I've talked about this in a previous video. I might make a little clip and share it with you all here, but one of the beloved dead that I honor year round really would be my mother. I was extremely close with her, and our relationship is deeply meaningful even after she has crossed that veil. And so around this time of year, I do put up a sort of altar for the dead where I acknowledge many different spirits from my mighty and beloved sort of thread connections. But here in my witchy room, actually on top of my bookshelf, I keep an altar specifically for my mother as a place of reverence and a place of honor, and that's year round. I also was gifted a picture of my great grandparents on my father's side that I have hung up in my hallway, which I feel like is a really subtle way of honoring them by just giving them a place on the wall. I don't think it necessarily always has to be an elaborate altar per se, but just by having their pictures present and walking by them every day definitely kind of puts sort of an imprint in my subconscious mind of a sort of connection that I have with these people. Around my sabbatic altar in the living room, which is where I kind of turn it with each wheel turn, so it looks a little bit different depending on the time of year, I keep pictures of some of the oldest photographs I've been able to find on my father's side of the family that I have in frames around there, especially as I'm currently really trying to study some folk magic practices and just folklore of French and German immigrants, and also of Germany and France as well. There's been a lot of discoveries that I have had in really the past year and a half on this sort of journey of trying to connect with this side of my ancestry and this side of my family, and struggling sometimes with this very intense somberness of wanting to connect and feeling disconnected, but also at the same time feeling a sense of a homecoming and a deep cross veil sort of connection to people that I've only recently even learned their name. So that's been a really interesting journey. Made some videos here on my channel kind of detailing that more specifically. So if you're interested, you can go check those out, but I'm gonna move on to the next topic. Last topic is, are there any resources for exploring one's own ancestry? So of course, like the first ones that come to my mind would be like 23andMe or Ancestry.com. I think that's a really great place to start to kind of map out a literal map of your DNA. I don't think that's where it should stop, but I do think that that's a good starting point. If you know any of the names of your beloved dead, you can also plug those in on Find a Grave, and you can find a lot of information there. I'll see if I can include some of the snippets that I found for myself. Sometimes photos of the actual graves, the location, sometimes even pictures of the actual people. If you're lucky, you'll be able to even find obituaries. And the way that the website is set up, it links spouses and children and grandparents and all of that, siblings all together. So you can really get lost in that sort of inverted triangle that I was talking about earlier, where you click on your grandmother and then your great grandmother and then her great grandfather and then his sibling. And then, yeah, it just goes on and on from there. It's fascinating to me. I really recommend giving that a try. Another great resource, if you're fortunate enough to have any older relatives that you can talk to them and get their stories, because a lot of times they can be a wealth of information. And even if some of the information is not super accurate, it gives you a sort of an idea and a glimpse into the culture of the time that your older relatives have come from.
On their way to the pub, and of course pub stands for public, and then they would go in and spend their money, so that the women with all the children, well, that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah, my phone died.
And, you know, because you use it so often, it's so easy to run the battery out.
Right.
So, well, anyway, and then I couldn't remember who made the call.
It was me.
I kind of thought, well, yes, because I think I left a voicemail and she called me back to give me the news about her ankles. So I go, which isn't much. Go ahead and ask the questions. Surprised. I would have guessed Western Europe, if not English, Scottish. I don't think I would have guessed Irish. But with alcoholism and addiction in the family, we used to say in AA, and they probably still do, if you're a Catholic, Irish, then you're an alcoholic. CIA, Catholic, Irish, alcoholic. Because so many of the Irish are alcoholics.
Really?
Oh, yes, darling. It's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. And they worked in the mines, and so they would sing on their way to the pub, and of course the pub stands for public, and then they would go in and spend their money, so that the women with all the children, you know, were just left almost destitute and on the church dole. And of course, when they talked to the priest said, "I'll pray for you, my dear."
Huh.
That was it.
Right.
Back then, because Catholics didn't believe in divorce.
Right.
Did you ever hear of the book Angela's Ashes?
I think especially as Americans, there's all types of like crazy lore that's been invented. You know, there's this notion that a lot of white people think that they're the granddaughter of their, you know, great grandma, Cherokee princess, whatever. There's so much wild lore. And when you begin to explore where those ideas come from, what it unpacks is some really crazy up history. And I think it's really important for us to face that and to confront that. The way I think that offers a type of healing. It does not make anything okay or right or take away from any damages that have been done, but it can certainly raise awareness and bring attention to it for us to begin to actually have real conversations about it. I know that I have found a ton of skeletons and tears and trauma and tragedy in varying degrees by pursuing this. And I think it's important too that, like, if you don't feel like you are in the headspace to work through some of this, don't. But don't just put it off indefinitely. It's valuable work to do, friends. Also, when it comes to looking at like ancestral cultural folk practices, check out some books. I'm going to like include some images somewhere here of some books that I've been working through and reading to connect more with the lore and the folk magic of my ancestry, but your mileage might vary, assuming that we don't have similar backgrounds. So look for books on folklore, look for books on history, even like the history of your city, the history of your state, the history of your county, the history of the country that you are in. Look for migration periods. I think that's going to be it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I've really been enjoying this Tradtober, and I hope that you all have well. Until next time, friends, blessed be, and I will see you in hell. Bye.
Down, down, down the road, down the witch's road. Down, down, down the road, down the witch's road. Down, down, down the road, down the witch's road. Circle sewn with fate, unlock thy hidden